Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Our keynote speaker for today is equally distinguished. Our second keynote speaker, Dr. Nelia G. Balgova is a highly regarded scholar and educator affiliated with Mindanao State University Iligan Institute of Technology. Her expertise lies in the field of international migration and its profound implications for education. Dr. Balgova's keynote is titled International Migration and Education Implications for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to gently remind all that you may type any questions for Dr. Nelia in the chat box of either Webex or YouTube. From there, I will read the questions in the Q&A session. Thank you. Dr. Nelia G. Balgova, Professor and Department Chair of English at MSU IIT. She earned her PhD in Human Sciences from Osaka University, Japan. She is presently the editor-in-chief of one of MSU IIT's official journals, the Mindanao Forum. Her most recent publication with Victoria Beverly Yamamoto of Osaka University is Politics of International Marriage in Japan. She was also a fellow of the Japan Foundation's Asia Leadership Fellow Program and the German Exchange Academic Services International Course. Her research interests include migration in the Philippines, language and culture, as well as semiotics. She has published numerous articles in academic journals and presented her work at numerous international conferences. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all aware that SDG stands for Sustainable Development Goals. It is a set of 17 global objectives established by the United Nations in 2015 as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Moreover, international migration and education refer to the movement of people across national borders and the impact of this migration on access to education in both the home and host countries. Dr. Nelia G. Balgova will be addressing the implications of international migration on education, particularly within the context of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Ladies and gentlemen, extend your warmest welcome to Dr. G. Balgova.
Good morning, everyone. At the onset, I would like to thank the Department of General Studies of Polytechnic Kota Kinabalu for giving me the opportunity and for trusting me to share my interest on international migration and education in the second International General Studies Conference. Allow me also at this early to congratulate the participants and presenters for engaging in meaningful discourses provided by the conference. My presentation deals with three broad concepts: the international sectionality of education and international migration and its impact to the 2030 as Sustainable Development Goals. Migration and mobility are major characteristics of societies worldwide, and in this talk, I shall focus on international migration, which can be defined as the movement of people across international borders for the purpose of settlement. People move for several and various reasons, but to be more specific, I will take into consideration migration where individual decisions to migrate are based on some optimizing opportunities like economic reasons. During recent years, efforts have been made to acknowledge the diverse nature of migration and its drivers. Of a more important point is the emphasis on the connection between development and migration, like its stipulation in the 1994 UN Population Development Conference in Cairo, with its subsequent UN actions following year after 2000. In the Millennium Development Goals, migration was still rarely present, but it gained traction in the debates on the 2030 Sustainable Goals. In general, the SDG framework, when it pertains to migration, promote inclusivity and the promise that no one will be left behind as their central principle. The 2030 SDGs also recognize the contribution of migration to both development and sustainability. 13 out of 17 goals contain targets and indicators that are relevant to migration and migrants. These are the following. Goal number 1, which is end of poverty in all forms everywhere. Goal 2, which is end of hunger and achieve food security and improve nutrition. Goal 3, which ensures healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. Goal 4, which is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong opportunities for all. Goal 5, which is achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Goal 8, to promote
Alright, so
sustained,
let's do quickly.
inclusive, and
Click, click, click.
sustainable economic growth. Goal 9, which is to build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization and innovation. Goal 10, which is to reduce inequality within and among countries. Goal 11, which is to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Goal 13, which is to take urgent action to combat climate change and its
Na?
impact.
Si
And
Jack,
goal
si Jack,
14,
sudah
which is to
berkecimpung. Oh,
conserve
Jack
and
kita.
sustainably use the ocean, the seas, and other marine resources. And goal 15, which is to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems. SDG number 4 made explicit mention of inclusive education and lifelong learning as a viable mechanism to achieve development and
Dale playing with
sustainability.
all the newbies.
Targets under
Huh?
this goal
Dale
aim to
playing with
meet
all the
the
newbies.
needs
Oh,
of
okay.
children in vulnerable groups, including migrant children, refugees, and other displaced persons that are often excluded from education system
Okay.
due to language or socio-economic barriers. Target 4.7 aims to promote intercultural education by focusing on education on human rights and citizenship in school curricula, school socio-emotional learning, and the promotion of a culture of peace and non-violence. My talk, therefore, investigates the relationship between migration and education and their implication towards the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. It is my hope that my presentation can elucidate the impact of migration on education to both host and sending countries, and in the process problematize education as an enabling right and driver towards sustainable development. Why does education matter for migrants? Both migration and education are investments in the human agent. Migration and education are decisions that are intertwined in many dimensions. Education and skill acquisition play an important role at many stages of an individual's migration. Decisions where to migrate and when to migrate are more or less shaped by the migrant's educational background. The economic success of the immigrants in the destination or host country is to a large extent determined by their educational background. For example, how transferable their skills are to the host country to the host country labor market and how much they invest in further skills after arrival. Additionally, education creates opportunities to understand and better integrate into the migrant's host country, particularly when considering areas such as language, laws, and customs. Furthermore, acquisition of education may be the sole reason for migration. Countries like Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, and the US are considered destinations for education because they offer educational products to international migrants. And how does migration impact the education of sending and host countries? Education and migration are not only related for those who migrate and their descendants or family. Migrations may also affect educational attainment of those who do not choose to move, both in the sending and destination countries. It may compel both countries to examine their skill base, which can affect the average levels of education and general educational externalities and new opportunities for human capital investments. In the Philippines, for example, which is one of the biggest labor sending countries in the world, people with higher educational level are more likely to plan to immigrate. This may lead to brain drain and deplete the skill base of the country. On the other hand, this trend may enhance the skill base of the destination country. A long-standing concern of migration and education pertains to the departure of migrant parents, which raises the questions about the well-being of children left behind. The schooling and academic performance of the children of migrants may be adversely affected because when both parents migrate, older children may have to assume the caregiving and other domestic responsibilities of adult members, which may force them to drop out of school and which changes the family structure as well. On the other hand, on the positive side, migration can increase household income through remittances, which can lead to greater investment in education. If remittances received by the household are sufficient to cover basic needs, children should not need to work within or outside the household to support the family. Immigrants who obtain training or education abroad may bring back knowledge and skills that can be used in the country of origin. This brain circulation can therefore contribute to human capital accumulation. Receiving countries can also benefit from migration in relation to education. It can populate otherwise depopulated schools brought by the country's aging population. In Japan, for example, foreign population is rising mainly. Although foreigners used to reside in urban areas, they are increasingly becoming a common sight in smaller Japanese cities, towns, and villages, which again can lead to the population of schools in this country. What are the implications of migration education to the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030? The and complex interaction among all these phenomena make the relationship between migration and education complex or to a certain extent complicated. The prevailing discourse and existing literatures view migration as a threat to prosperity and social order, especially for receiving countries and for movements such as from global south to the global north. This threat has to be fixed by appropriate policies, no, which can be translated into repressive variants in the form of tighter border control or the need, the imperativeness of the need to address the root causes of migration, which is usually attributed to poverty, violence, or economic underdevelopment in countries of origin, which so that people do not have to move if these root causes can be addressed. This perspective, according to Castles, ignores the fact then that global migration has become a normal part of social relations because of globalization, advancement of technology, and access to information. Nian Hughes and Leung argues that the 2030 SDGs as a development framework still treat migration as binary and linear process. To elucidate this, it is often assumed that people from poor countries tend to migrate to rich countries tend to migrate to rich countries, and migrants move and then stay or perhaps return to their country of origin. They further add that poverty and development are seen as territorialized processes, and development is regarded as a process that only takes place at home. If this is the case, according to the authors, these interpretations do not reflect the transnational, meaning the simultaneous engagements of the migrants to the host country, in the host country, and in the country of origin. No? Or even the diasporic and the territorialized characteristics of the global economy and nature of international mobility of people. The relationship between education and other aspects of the SDGs put forward the assumption of the educational potential, which makes, and this principle or this notion make education as an enabling right. But education, especially institutional and formal education, is still viewed as a borderline practice and are inevitably linked to the interests of nation states. And the tendency is that nation states tend to take care of the education of their citizens, thus perhaps displacing or deterritorializing the migrants. But education within the context of migration can also be spaces and places which can essentially bring people together, no? Bring people of diverse backgrounds and nationalities together, which is the result of international migration. SDG number 4 hopes to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong opportunities for all. But the United Nations, in one of its working papers, made notations on the challenges, risk, and limitation in attaining this goal in relation to migration. For example, the UN indicated that in SDG number 4, one of the challenges that perhaps we can encounter is that this high demand for skills worldwide accentuates inequities in in the depletion of intellectual resources in developing and developed countries. Acquisition of education unavailable in home countries prompts an important portion of international migration. Subsequently, a huge and growing global deficit in both technical vocational skills and in persons with tertiary education, particularly constraining employers and economic development in industrialized countries, affects countries in contrast to the huge surplus of youth with neither employable skills nor access to skills training, particularly in developing countries, which will hinder the attainment of Goal 4.3, which is to ensure equal access for all men and women to affordable and quality technical, vocational, and tertiary education, including university education. Thus, in the discourse of sustainable development within the context of education and migration, we also need to speak about the paradoxes of mobility capital, the movements of capital and their effects, and the unequal mobility or questionable equity within mobility, which will also lead to the discussion on how to reduce inequalities. Therefore, and I think this is now the main argument of my presentation, universal concepts for resolving a possible migrant crisis need to include also transnational, national, and local processes and policies because migration is always tied to different localities and structures on international, national, and local scales, such as communities, families, and individual. This is crucial because education system are among the first social institutions uh, to respond to changing social and political structures. Therefore, the implementation of education is important for the formation of political and cultural identities which are necessary to realize the goals of 2030 SDGs. Allow me to put to shed light, no, on these concepts, no, in relation to my research on migration and education. My research on international migration, particularly Philippine migration to Japan, covers to a certain extent the complexities of education as a framework for identity formation and agency among Filipino migrants. Issues such as on gender, ethnicity, ideologies come into fore in the analysis of forces that develop and manage social and political differences, inequalities, and conflicts when migrants straddle two simultaneous nation states, which are addressed in the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. For example, inequalities of language use and teaching, specifically English, among Filipino English teachers in Japan, reveal the politics of English language teaching and how the ideology of native speakerism became a repudiation of their skills and qualification as English teachers, thus paving the way for an interrogation of language ideologies and of linguistic and racial identities. Additionally, education can be a contested and negotiated site for Filipino migrants married to Japanese when it comes to raising their bicultural children or children of mixed heritage. Our research also shows migrants married to Japanese strive to provide their children with opportunities to choose better university education within and outside Japan. And thus, we can say that education also compels children to examine their mixed identity when they interact with other children in schools and institutions. As my concluding remarks, uh, I can say that when education and migration are problematized, there are several key links which join the to build a better related understanding of the world and of the society and of particularly the sending countries and the countries. These refer to already adopted educational policies that insist on the wide availability of education. Thus, the importance of education for economic development, social inclusion, environmental sustainability, and good governance is emphasized when we, I think, when we try to find or establish the intersectionality of migration and education. Education is a bridging factor for all dimensions of sustainable development. It is estimated that improving access to education for migrants will affect the achievement of a number of global sustainable development goals, which can unite the economic, social, and environmental dimensions of development. It can also address the issue of migration in the such as the need to protect the rights of migrant workers, especially women and children. Education is chosen as an important field because of its inevitable connection with solving the key challenge of modern societies related to social inequalities, the reduction of which is a prerequisite for achieving sustainable societies and communities, which is the main point of the 2030 SDGs. It is then a valid point that education is an enabling right for migrants scattered all over the world. And as such, I would like to argue that policies anchored on SDGs should create equal opportunities for them without disregarding their identity and cultural backgrounds. International politics, the politics of receiving countries and sending countries, which shape the plight and conditions of migrants, should commit to this. That ends my presentation. Thank you very much for listening and good morning.
Dear participants, we have just had the privilege of listening to an enlightening keynote address by Dr. Nelia G. Balgoa on the topic of international migration and education, implications for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Dr. Balgoa has provided us with valuable perspectives on a critical issue that holds profound implications for our global society. Let's take a moment to recap some key takeaways from Dr. Balgoa's presentation. She highlighted the complex relationship between international migration and education, emphasizing the role of education in achieving sustainable development goals. Dr. Balgoa discussed the challenges and opportunities presented by international migration and how these impact access to quality education, particularly for vulnerable populations. She also emphasized the importance of inclusive and equitable education systems as integral to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. On behalf of the conference organizers and all the participants, I extend our deepest gratitude to Dr. Nelia G. Balgoa for sharing her expertise and insights with us today. Your presentation has illuminated a critical aspect of the global landscape and its implication for education. Let us move on to the Q&A session. Hi, Dr. Nelia. Good morning.
Hello, good morning. Good morning to all the participants and the organizers of this conference. And thank you for the invitation. It is indeed my pleasure to be with you all.
Okay, we have one question, Dr. Nelia, from the audience. And it is, hi, doctor, from Jamie. In your opinion, how can we close the gap of inequality mobility? I repeat, in your opinion, how can we close the gap of inequality mobility?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sir Jaime, for that question. Inequality, I think, is often caused by power relations, no? And power struggle or the politics of everything. No? The continuous struggle of power and legitimization always causes inequality. No? So, for example, there is always inequality when you have dynamics with uh, more developed countries or as compared to developing countries. Since international migration, let's say we do not include we do not include the backyard migration. No? Always involves governments, no, and nation states. And international migration is often shaped by political forces. No? For example, the requirements for migration or to work in developed countries are often dictated by the laws and practices of the receiving countries. So, in order to close the gap of inequality, I think it is very important to take into consideration the participation of the receiving countries and the host countries. And bilateral agreements, no, need to work out on how migrants can be protected once they are in the host countries. Just as when when sending countries send their people to other countries, especially for in labor migration, they should be able to protect, no, by laws, no, and policies the plights and conditions of the migrant workers. Inequality, I think, can only be reduced or can be closed, or the gap, no, can only be closed through the legitimacy of laws and policies between the sending and receiving countries. I think that is only the way we can close inequality. No? The legal means the power of the laws and the policies in international migration. I hope it answers your question, Jaime.
Testing. Okay, there you have it, the answer from Dr. Nelia. Thank you, Jamie, for the question, and thank you, Dr. Nelia, for answering that question. Dear participants, you may email the keynote speakers today if you have any more questions or are interested in the topics that they have shared. Okay, no more questions? Right. Thank you, audience, and Dr. Nelia for that question and answer session. We are truly honored to have had Dr. Balgova as a keynote speaker at this conference. Her contribution has enriched our understanding and raised important questions that we, as a community of educators and scholars, must continue to explore. In conclusion, thank you once again, Dr. Nelia Jibagowa and Dr. Didik Muhammad Nur Haris, for your enlightening keynote address. So, their expertise promises to provide invaluable insights and set the stage for stimulating discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, let's show our appreciation with another round of applause for Dr. Balgova. With that, we will now transition to the next session of our conference. Please stay engaged and inspired as we continue our journey of learning and discovery. Ladies and gentlemen, we now invite all the presenters and team members to log into your respective virtual presentation rooms provided earlier. We will commence to the parallel sessions. Please feel free to reach out to the Secretariat via the Telegram group should you have any questions. Have a wonderful conference.